Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf kafchet. We're really deep into avedot in our daf, and we're going to really get to a lot of the practical and see the real life kind of how all the details work. You know, sometimes in the Gemara we get a lot of details, sometimes we don't get all the details, but here we get really a pretty good picture of how this all went about. So it's a bit long daf with a lot of different things. It's actually not a complicated daf, but there is a lot in it. So we're going to start with finishing up this topic of simanim being deoraita or de Rabbanan, which means, again, are you allowed when you go and you claim a lost item based on simanim? And we brought up this issue at the end of yesterday's daf. Well, the issue I'll get to in a minute, but is this by Torah law or by rabbinic law that I can actually claim an item by bringing simanim? Now, we take this as obvious, but what Rava says is if it's really only rabbinic, if it's Torah law, I get it. But if it's rabbinic, because, you know, once the Torah says this is the way it is, this is the way it is. If it's rabbinic, what right do the rabbis have to do this? Because theoretically, by allowing simanim, it's very possible somebody else will collect the item instead of, let's say, I'm the person who lost an item. Could be someone else will collect it instead of me. It could be someone else has simanim. And in fact, the case we brought yesterday was, and we're going to bring it again today, a different variation of it, about a malva and a love, which is a good example because it's a case where the document was first in the hands of the creditor, and then it's supposed to be given to the debtor, you know, the person who took the loan, once it's paid back. Now, let's say it fell from the debtor, but the creditor could for sure bring simanim because they had the document in their possession for a long time also. So here we have an object that's owned at different points by two different people, and it's very significant whether it's owned by the malva, as we learned many times already, that then the malva can collect it. Right, the creditor can go collect the loan perhaps a second time. If we return it to the creditor, you know, they'll collect the loan that was already given back. So in this case, we're going to basically see that it's really what right do the rabbis have to basically say by Torah law, really, no one can get it back. But by rabbinic law, because the rabbi said, again, what did Rava explain? What could be the logic? Well, it's not always, but it's mostly in the best interest of the person who loses something to be able to collect it with simanim. Because if we didn't allow that, they usually have no way to collect it. It's hard for them to find witnesses. It's hard for them to find any other way to prove it. So it's in their best interest, but not always. And that's going to be the problem here. So we'll start with our second question. Our first question we resolved because we said that case was a unique case and it had its own different reason and logic. It's not really because of the simanim. But in this Mishna, now we're really going to have an issue. It says, Matzah tachrich shel shtarot, or agudah shel shtarot. Remember, we learned this Mishna not so long ago. If you find a bundle of documents, okay, two different kinds of bundles, harei ze yachzir, we return it. Yeah. Hachinami, tenichale lelove la'adure le'malve. What? You think in this case, the love wants it returned to the malve? What if it's the loves and the malve just knows, you know, that it was bundled up in a particular way? You know, could be there were a few IOUs that one guy owed to another guy, and they were bundled up together, and he passed it on and gave it to the love. And now he remembers exactly what it was, tells how many documents were in there, and gets to get it back. That seems like a good case where if really it belonged to the love, he would definitely not want these documents getting back into the hands of the malve, because now they're going to be collected from him a second time. So this is, how could the rabbis basically allow this to happen when basically going to incur a huge expense on behalf of the love, who is possibly the owner of these documents? So simanim could really get you into trouble. And again, it's more like if we assume simanim work on the Torah level, because on a rabbinic level, because the rabbi said we know it's in the best interest of the one who lost it, it's possible it's really not in their best interest. So Rava, on account of that question, after all the attempts to bring sources to prove it, and we couldn't prove whether simanim were d'oraita or d'Rabbanan, now Rava says it must be simanim or d'oraita, because otherwise this makes no sense. And he further proves it by quoting a source we saw yesterday that we actually explained is not a good proof, but now he uses it as his proof. What is that? Right, the item will be left in your possession until the person who lost it comes to claim it, to which they say that's a totally unnecessary pasuk. What, you're going to return it to the person before they even ask for it? Ella, right, you obviously can't. You don't even know whose it is. Ella darshehu. So what's this drosh? It's not the subject of that sentence is not until the person who lost it demands it from you. It's the opposite. Ela darshehu, it's your job as the one who found the item, lidrosh, to check. Im ramayhu, im eino ramay. Now you have to check to make sure the person's not tricking you. Lav b'simanim. Now, how on earth would you check if not ask simanim, right? That's the way we normally view it. Shma mina. So what do we see here? It's a Torah law. Now, we did say there, perhaps it means something else. Maybe you need to bring witnesses that vouch to are they an honest person, which actually we're going to see later, okay? But right now, Rava says maybe we can understand it the simple reading, and that's based on the fact that we basically knocked out the logic of simanim being by rabbinic law. So now Rava says the following statement. We're going to cut him off in the middle and say, what on earth are you saying? And then come back and finish his statement. Amar Rava, intim tzalomar simanim d'oraita. If you want to say simanim d'oraita, this is a strange thing. Didn't Rava just say simanim are d'oraita, are Torah? So they cut him off and they say, intim tzalomar, hapashat le simanim d'oraita. Mishum de'ikal me'emar kedish, sorry. Hapashat le simanim d'oraita. So they say, what do you mean, if you want to say? You just said, you just concluded that simanim are d'oraita. So what are you talking about? Well, he says the following. If you want to say simanim d'oraita, meaning mishum de'ikal me'emar kedishininan, because now what did he do? He basically said logic would seem it's not the Rabbanan. And I have this proof from this, it's actually a Taanitic source. It comes up in the Mishna. Actually, we'll see the Mishna later today. You have to make sure they're not a Ramai, which he assumed meant simanim. But since there's a different way to understand that source, that you could say it's edim, just in case you think maybe not. So I'm going to say my statement as, and again, we haven't heard the rest of the statement. If you think simanim are Torah law, which I think they are, but maybe you disagree with me, now he's going to give, and now we're going to go into a whole slew of cases where two people bring simanim, or two people bring something, or two people, and we're going to have, what do we do in this case? In other words, if simanim are by Torah law, how are we going to clarify who's right and who's not? So I'm a Rav. Intim tzilomar simanim d'oraita. Now I'm going back to the first line and now skipping the parenthetical question about him. Simanim v'simanim. What if you bring simanim and I bring simanim? Now what do? Well, yaniach, we leave it. Okay, we say, well, nothing to do about it. No one can get it back. Simanim ve'edim. What if you bring simanim and I bring witnesses? Okay, so you say, I know it's a ring with a sapphire in it, blah blah blah, and you explain. And I have witnesses that say this ring was mine. Yinaten lebal ha'edim. I get it, because witnesses are stronger than simanim for sure. Simanim ve'simanim ve'ed echad. You bring simanim, I bring simanim, and I bring one witness. Now I don't have two witnesses, but I do have one. Yinaten ed echad kamanda leitedam v'yania. Ed echad doesn't count for anything. The reason why ed echad generally isn't believed is because we don't trust one witness. We think that I could just find a friend to just vouch for me and lie for me. It's very easy to do that. Two already is much more complicated. So because of that, we say, if I bring simanim and ed echad, it's as if I just brought simanim. It doesn't count at all. Edei ariga ve'edei nefila. I bring witnesses that say I wove it. You bring witnesses that say it fell from you. Tinatan le'edei nefila. You get it. Why? In other words, the fact that I wove it doesn't mean I kept it. It could be I sold it to you. So the fact that it fell from you is a much stronger argument. Midat orko umidat ruchbo. This is kind of interesting. If you give the length and I give the width, now we must be talking about something like a talit, which is like a shawl. Now think about how you wear a shawl. If you wear a shawl around your shoulders, then what do people see? People see the width. They don't see the length because the length is wrapped around you. So because of that, we're going to say, Tinaten lemidat orko, timidat ruchbo shiur kamashar. When people are walking around wearing it, you could see the width, so you could basically estimate what the width is, even if it's not yours. But midat orko lo mishtarle, but you're not going to be able to assess how much the length is because you don't see that. Midat orko, midat ruchbo. Just 1 second, I want to check one thing. 1 second. Okay. Midat orko, midat rochbo, umidat gamav. So one provides the orech and the rochav, the length and the width, and the other provides the gamav, which they say is the length and the width together. Okay, like you give an amount of, maybe it's talking about the square, the square area of the whole thing. Yinaten midat orko v'rochbo. Okay, so the one who says the midah of the orech, 1 second, I forgot how this works. 1 second. Measure the length. Yeah, why is this? I forget why this is. Because, right, okay. So this is because, sorry, midat or ko midat rochbo, or if you give the length and the width, or you just give a general amount of the length and the width together. So you get the one who says or ko rochbo gets it because it's a much more specific. You're being more specific. You're saying, I know the length is this and the width is that. As opposed to just giving a combined measure where then, it could be you don't really, you just guessed it. Midat orko, midat rochbo, midat mishkalotav. Someone gave the length and width, but the other one gave the weight. Weight is much more difficult to assess by looking at something. So therefore, yinaten midat mishkalotav. By the way, the gamav is from gamma. It's the letter gamma is like a chapsofit, right? It's it looks like length and width together. It's got one line and the other line. So that's why they call it gamav. Now we get to a different type of thing. She says the get was like this, right? She gives a siman for the get. And he says the get, I give a siman. Now here it's complicated because it's like the malva and the lova. It could be they both had the get, right? Now, if he gives the simanim and we want to say, oh, that means the get fell from him, that means she's not divorced. If she gives simanim and wants to get the get, it means she's divorced. That's a big issue. Now, why would she know what the get looks like if she didn't receive it? So therefore, he for sure saw the get, no matter what, whether he gave it or didn't give it. But if she knows the simanim in the get, then we believe her. Because how else would she know what the get looked like if she hadn't received it? At least that's the basic. We're going to get a little more complicated in a minute. So if that's the case, yinatein la. Because how else would she have known what the get looked like if she didn't receive it? Bimai. So now they say, well, what kind of siman? If she gave the length and width of it, she could have seen it while he was getting ready to give it to her, but he didn't necessarily give it to her. So that doesn't prove that she received it. But if she says there's a little hole right next to this letter, if you remember, we talked about that before, then it would be obvious she received the get because she wouldn't notice that just by looking from a distance. Now the assumption is they would tie the get by a string. So if he gives a siman about the string and she gives a siman about the string that was tying the get together, again, she's believed. So now again, they say, well, it depends. If she said it was white string or a red string, that doesn't help because it could be he had to get ready to give her, didn't give her yet, but she saw it. You could see from a distance what color the string is. This is like the talit we saw before. She's not going to know the length of the string unless she received it and opened up and measured it, right? It's not the kind of thing when the get is tied up, you can't eyeball it and say, oh, I know how long that is. If he says it was in a box and she says it was in a box, yinatein lo. In this case, he gets the get. Why is that? This is a kind of funny answer. My taima. She knows her husband. She knows he puts all the documents in a box. So saying a document was in a box is like just giving a good guess of what she assumes he's going to do. Some of the commentaries say that it can't be she put it in a box and he's just lying and saying she put it in a box because she generally wouldn't put a get in a box. What they're saying here is not necessarily that she knows her particular husband and he puts his documents in boxes, but more like the general thing would be a husband would stick the get in a box if he's not planning to use it right now because he just puts it away. The woman wants her get accessible, so when she gets married, it's accessible and she doesn't put it in a box. Whether that's true or not, one can make an argument either which way, but it's a possible way that some people understand this. Okay, finish that section. In that section, we basically discussed simanim deoraita. Basically, Rava concludes after raising difficulties with his explanation of why we would allow this whole thing to work if it was only rabbinic. Then he basically says it's deoraita, but then he says when we say it's d'oraita, even though we still have to figure out what to do when two people are claiming simanim. And he gave all sorts of permutations of who we would believe which siman is a more reliable siman than the other. Okay, you can see how much they were concerned with people taking advantage. And we're going to discuss this as we go on the daf. As we get through the daf, it comes up in a bunch of sections. There was clearly a lot of Ramaut going around, what we're going to see, the Gemara calls it, or the Mishna calls it Ramai, right? People, what do you call them, swindlers or whatever they are, right? Dishonest people trying to claim items of other people. You can see also why it's easier to be dishonest about a lost item because it's not, and we talked about this earlier when we compared Aveda and Metzia, Aveda to Mekachumemka, right? You're fighting over something that really wasn't even owned by, like it was lost, it was found on the street. So you don't feel so bad taking it away from someone because you feel like I was somewhat ownerless anyway, even though it's not really technically ownerless until the person is Yehush, but you can see why people might have taken advantage here. Okay, Mishna. So next issue, we're going to have a lot of Mishnayot today. We're going to jump from issue to issue. How long do you have to announce that this item is lost? Until his neighbors know about it. Whose neighbors? Good question. We're going to get to that in the Gemara. First question of the Gemara. That's divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda omer, shalosh regalim, the 3 holidays. Why the 3 holidays? Well, that was the time when everybody came to the temple. So it was a great opportunity to announce a lost item in the biggest forum possible. So, achar haregal acharon shiva yamim. So you do 3, a whole cycle of 3 regalim. Okay, so wherever you're up to, right? Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, or Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, or Shavuot, Sukkot, Pesach. And then whichever one the last one is, you announce for another 7 days. Why is that? So the Mishnah explains. We want to allow people to go home. It takes them about 3 days to get home. Yachzor shlosha will come home another 3 days. V'yachriz yom echad, and we'll announce it for 1 day. In other words, who announces? Well, you'll go home, check if you lost it. You don't always know. Here, something was lost. You don't know if it was you or not. You check if you lost it. You come back. It takes you another 3 days to get back. And then 1 day to basically say, oh, where's that person who was telling me they lost this item? They found an item, and get your item back. We're going to have some issues with this amount of time it took people to get home because that's going to contradict the Mishna we saw in Taanit, which you might remember. We'll get there very soon. So the first question is, Tana Shchenei Aveda. My Shchenei Aveda. What is this? The neighbors of, it sounds like the person who lost the item. Well, there's a problem with that. Rabbi Meir says you just have to make sure that the neighbors of the person who lost it know about it. Right? Like the whole neighborhood. That presumes that you know what the neighborhood is of the person who lost the item, which presumes that you know who lost the item. But we don't know who lost the item. If you know who lost the item and then you announce it in their neighborhood, it's ridiculous. If you know who lost the item, go give it to them. Means the place, the neighborhood, you have to announce it in the neighborhood where you found it. So basically, you find it on the street, you have to announce it in that whole neighborhood and make sure everybody knows. Once everybody knows and nobody claims it, you're done with your responsibility of announcing. Rabbi Yehuda omer. Now let's get back to this other opinion. 3 regalim plus 7 days, 3 days to get home, 3 days to get back, and 1 day to announce. So, this contradicts the Mishnah in Taanit. When do we start asking for rain? On the 3rd of Mar Cheshvan. Rabban Gamliel omer, b'shiv abo. And that's what we actually hold by in Israel. We start saying it on the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. Why? 15 days after the holiday. Why do we only start asking for rain 15 days after the holiday? We want to allow the people who live far, right, by Nahar Prat, by the Euphrates, to get home. So, right, what's the issue? We don't want to be praying for rain. We don't want people praying for rain when they don't really want rain. When you're on the way home, you definitely don't want it to rain. But this is a situation we knew about, that we dealt with a lot this year, which is praying for rain during a time when we're at war. And who wants to pray for rain in Israel when there's a war going on and you know it's going to make the soldiers' lives difficult, right? So we want to be wholeheartedly praying. So what do you see here? 15 days it takes people to get home, not 3 days. Whoa, that's a big difference. And according, right, we said 7 days. It should be 15 plus another 15 plus the 31 days. So we're going to try to reconcile this in different ways. Rav Yosef lo kashe kam b'mikdash rishon kam b'mikdash shein. Each Mishnah is relating to a different Beit HaMikdash. Okay, that's a bit of a difficult response because it's saying the Mishnah, which was put together at the end of Bayit Sheni, right? Well, partly, they started a little talking about these things during, or wording these things when the temple was still around, but the destruction happened in 70. The Tkufa, the Tanaim is from 0 to 200. So it's a little weird that first of all, it'd be weird that one Mishnah is talking about Bayit Rishon in the first temple period and one is talking about second temple period. And it would be even like you would also think if you're talking in the Mishnah, you're probably talking about second temple period because you're either still living in the second temple or you're living right after the second temple. It's a little bit of a strange answer, but okay, now we have to figure out what's the difference. Well, but Mikdash Rishon, Rav Yosef explains, the Nefisha Yisrael too, but there were a lot of Jews then. Dechtibu Yisrael, Yehuda Yisrael, Rabim Kachol Asher Layam Larov. Right? How are you going to prove this? It's not from Sukkim in the prophets. So Sefer Melachim Aleph explains, wow, there were a ton of people living there, like the sand on the earth. And therefore, being on Kulei Hai, you needed more time to get home because more people, we assume, means they covered more space, right, and farther away. But Mikdash Sheni, the Lo Nefisha Yisrael Tuva, but in the second temple period, there weren't as many people. How do we know this? Tichtibu, they're going to quote from Ezra. Kol Akal Ke'echad Arba Ribo Alafim, Shlosh Meot V'Shishim, it gives a number, right? You can count the people. It's not like they were like the sand. Lo B'ina Kulei Hai. They didn't need as much time to get home. Amarle Abai. Abai says, what are you talking about, Rav Yosef? It's the opposite. Haktiv, doesn't it say in the time of, this is in the book of Nehemiah, which was also the time of Ezra, Vayishvu HaKohanim v'Aleviim v'Amashorim v'Ashorim v'Chol Yisrael ba'areihem. They each lived in their own city. It sounds like they were actually much more spread out. And since that's the case, it sounds like it was the opposite. Doesn't matter how many people, it depends how spread out they are and how good transportation is. Now, nowadays, we always think things improve over time. But they're going to say no. The transportation options were much better in Bayit Rishon and not in the second temple period. Why? Well, Mikdash Rishon Dinafisha Yisrael Tuva v'Dimitzavet Alma. Well, in this first temple period, there were a lot of Jews and they gathered together a lot. Okay, what this means exactly is a good question, but they traveled in packs, okay, and because of that, they had caravans going all day, all night. People were always traveling. They were always filling up, right? You think about buses, that certain bus routes or things won't go until they actually fill up. So it was easy to fill things up and they traveled. The people traveled a lot. So they did it during the day, during the night. Therefore, because there was more transportation options and they also went during the day and at night, it was much quicker to get back. Mikdash Sheni, the exact opposite. There weren't a lot of people. They didn't get together as much, and there were less options for transportation. And they didn't travel during the day and the nighttime. And then you needed a lot more time. This is not the most convincing answer, okay? As you see, they're using proofs, by the way, of how much population from Sukkim, which, could be an exaggeration, right? It's not really clear, any of this information. But in any case, we have a possible. The truth is, Rav Yosef gave an answer. Abai said, I think it would be the opposite of what you're saying. And then Rava comes in and says, I don't agree with any of your answers. Rava Amar, Lo Shna b'Mikdash Rishon, Lo Shna b'Mikdash Sheni. This is not the difference. The difference is simple. It's a matter of what we're talking about. When it comes to rain, we're going to give people 15 days to get home. We don't want to start praying for rain until we're sure everybody's home. But when it comes to lost items, Lo Etrichu Rabbanan b'Avedai Yoter Midai. They didn't want to make the life, and we're going to see this later also, the life of the person who's watching this lost item. We don't want to make, you're going to have to wait there 7 days after the holiday. Could you imagine? Everybody goes home and you're stuck waiting there because you found someone's lost item. So basically, we want to make the life easier of the person who found the Aveda. Now, we're not making your life super easy, but we definitely don't want to make it more difficult. We're not going to make you wait till the very last person gets home, comes back. Do you imagine waiting 31 days after the holiday? That would be crazy. So because of that, we were lenient here. And therefore, it's not exactly how much time it's going to take everybody to get home. It's just an average time. And we're going to go back to this line of Rava in another minute. Amar Ravina, Shma Minar. You can infer from here that ki machriz glima machriz. The fact that we give you 7 days, 3 days to get home, 3 days to get back, and 1 day to announce, must be that when the person announces what they found, they announce, I found a cloak. Okay, this is just an example. I found a ring. I found it, right? You announce the object that you find. Why? How do you get it from here? And we're going to see this is a debate further on. It's a debate here as well by different Amoraim. Here there's a debate, and later we'll see there's a debate about it. If you say just, I found a lost item generally, and then everyone has to go home, check their house to see if they lost anything. We need to add an extra day. Because if you hear that a cloak was found, so you'll go into your coat closet, if you have one, right, your cloak closet, and you'll look for a cloak and you'll see, oh, all my cloaks are here. Great, it wasn't me. But if they just say, I found a lost item, you'll go to your house, you'll check all your jewelry, you'll check your closet for clothes, you'll check, it'll take a while. Okay, that'll take at least a day to see if you're really missing anything. So from here we can infer, they say what the object was. Shmamina. Rava Amal, again comes Rava with the same thing he said before. No, we don't add an extra day, not for that reason. Really, avedata machris, or you could say, he doesn't say you do say, but he says, afilu tem avedata machris. I can explain this even if you say aveda machris. And we don't add an extra day. Why? Because lo etricho rabbanan ba'aveda yoter midai. Again, they don't want to make it too difficult. Remember also, Rava makes a lot of sense because you've already announced it the first regal. You've already announced it the second regal. This is your last time you're announcing it. So we give the person an extra few days, but they should have really checked the last time. Tanu Rabbanan, another braitot which discusses what you announce. Regal rishon omer regal rishon. Regal sheni omer regal sheni. So when you're making the announcements, I found a ring. And you say, and this is the first time I'm announcing it, right? This is the first holiday. And then the next time you say, this is the second holiday. And what do you assume? The third time? Say, this is the third holiday. No. Regal shlishi omer stam. You just say, I found a lost item, and you don't say, this is the third time. V'amai, lema regal shlishi. Right? Why don't you say that? We don't want you to announce, say, this is the third regal. Why? We're worried someone might hear and think you said two. Think, oh, I have time. I'll come back next time, and not realize this is their last chance to get it. Okay? Because people hear things and don't always pay attention. And if they hear shlishi, they might think sheni. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, sheni nami. Shouldn't say sheni because in other words, when they hear second, they might think, oh, maybe he said first. So we're now on a bet. They say, no, we don't care if you mix up first and second because it's not your last chance. It's the last one we want you to know. So if you know, everyone knows now, they hear and they don't hear them announce what regal it is. Everybody knows it's the last regal. It's actually funny. It's by not saying it, it'll be more of an indicator than yes saying it. If you do say it, somebody might hear wrong. But if you don't hear anything, you'll know for sure. Tanu Rabbanit, another braitot. And here we're going to have two of these today, where we describe his historical changes that happen. This, sometimes we get barishona, and then something happened. This is going to be 3 stages. Sometimes when you get these kind of mishnayot, there's a lot of mishnayot and braitot that have this structure. It used to be like this, and then something changed and caused that. And you usually don't know when that happened. Here we're going to get one of the changes. We know exactly when it happened. The other one, not as much. Barishona, or not at all. This goes by the opinion that we saw in the Mishna, that's when you announce. So originally, this is what they would do. They would come to the temple. They would announce. Okay, that was the way people used to do it when the temple was around. Now, comes 70. Year 70, no more temple. Well, you can't do that anymore. So Mishachara Beit HaMikdash, so we know exactly when this change happened. Shibaneh b'merabi amenu, right? That maybe rebuilt speedily in our time. Hitkinu shiu machrizim bebatei knesiot bebatei midrashot. So they made a takana. We have to announce it in the shuls and the batei midrash. That was the place where people congregated. Okay. By the way, knesiot is from the word lit kanes, to get together. Could be just like a town hall, place where people got together, or it could be a shul. Okay, it could be announced, could be understood in both ways. Anyway, it was places where people congregated. However, Misha Rabuha Anasim, which we're going to learn in a bit, there was the Persians. When the Persians were ruling, all you did was pass it around by word of mouth. You didn't announce it publicly anymore. Okay, so my Misha Rabu Anasim, what is this? So this, we don't know when exactly this happened, although you could check when the Persians started ruling, but we don't know if it's exactly when they started ruling or not. But what is this? Whenever the Persians would hear somebody lost something, they would say, that goes to the king. So we didn't want people to lose their items, so we didn't announce it publicly. We would just quietly pass it from person to person. Now we're going to hear a story about this, and that's why we're going to know it was the Persians. Rabbi Ami eshkach udir de dinare. So Rabbi Ami found a vessel filled with dinarim, with money. Chazyahu barnash de kamirtat. So now this guy who was a Roman saw him that he was scared. Amar le zil shkol nafshach, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to take it away from you. The lav parsai ana da amra avidat lamalka. I'm not a Persian that says the aveda goes to the king. I'm a Roman. We don't do that kind of thing." Okay, and here you see it was the Persians and not the Romans. Tanu Rabbanan. I see someone wrote about this in the chat. Okay, this you might remember from the Choni Amalgal story. Even Toen Hayta Yerushalayim. There was a place called the Even Hatoen. It was a stone. Kol Mish Avdalo Avidan Ifna L'Sham. That was the lost and found in the temple. Okay, there was a place, the lost and found place. It was called the Even Hatoen. Anyone who found a lost item would go to there and announce it. Because it was a lost and found, anyone who lost an item would go to there, and and anyone who found would go to there. Okay, so if you imagine the hustle bustle of the temple during the time of the holidays, one of the things that was going on, besides all the buying of the sacrifices and all the other stuff that was going on, there was also a whole exchange going on of lost items. So if you lost something and you found something, you would go there and you would meet up. This one would announce, this one would say, "Oh yeah, that's mine," give simanim and get their item back. Bezoi shashaninu, and you might remember this from the Choni Amalgal story, Tzu u're'u im nimchat even hatoen. Remember, Choni asked for rain and then too much rain came and he said, "Go check if the even hatoen is covered. And if it's covered, I'll know there's too much rain. I'll have to ask God to stop the rain." Okay, so that was that you might remember from that story. Okay, new Mishna. Amal et aveda velo amal simaneha. If you say what you lost, but you didn't give simanim, we're going to have to understand what this means. But what do you mean you say what was lost? We'll get back to this. Lo yitain lo. You don't get it back. In other words, you have to, the simple reading of this is you just have to give simanim. The question is, well, we'll get to it in a minute when we get to the Gemara. The haramai, now here again, we get to the Ramaim, and this is really the source we quoted before. If someone is a swindler, we do not give it to them. Again, we're going to take this pasuk that we saw before. It says, until your brother asks for it. Okay, this doesn't go through the whole, obviously you wouldn't give it back to him unless he asked for it, to which they say, yeah, what it means is you have to check, is the person a ramai or not? So now we're going to go back to this question of what exactly you announce. We're going to try to prove from the words of the Mishnah which one is right. Itma. Rabbi Yehuda omer avidata machris. Rabbi Nachman omer glima machris. So Rabbi Yehuda says, you say, I found a lost item. That's it. Rabbi Nachman says, you say what item it is that you found. Rabbi Yehuda amar avidata machris. Why? Now here we're going to give a reason for all of them. Amar glima machris chashin and ramai. The more information you give them, the more likely someone could trick you about it, right? You could say, I found a cloak, and then the person could kind of guess some simanim about the cloak, and if they're right, they'll get it. And that's really, but I can't help thinking about Annie, right? In the Annie movie, right? He offered this big gift, and everybody, to anyone who would claim Annie, that they were the real person, and everybody came trying to claim, oh, it's me, right? Because that's what people do. So, Rav Nachman amar glima machris, l'ramai lo cheshina, d'im kain ein l'davar sof. He says, we're not worried that they're going to be a ramai here because otherwise there's no end to this. You can always worry about a ramai. So even if I say it's a glima, you can still worry that if I just say it's a lost item randomly, you could still worry that someone's lying about it. So it's never going to end. We'll never give back lost items if we're so worried about a ramai. And therefore he says, you can just announce a glima. Tanan. So now we're going to bring a Mishna to prove one or the other. Now we're going to get to the difficulty in the language of the Mishnah. Amar et aveda velo amar et simaneha. If you say the aveda, but you don't give it simanim, what does it mean you say the aveda? What does it mean if not, right? Hareta lo yitain lo. So iamar bishlama aveda tamachris. If you say generally, like Rabbi Yehuda said, you just say, I lost, right? I found a lost item. Then when it says amar ta aveda velo amar et simaneha, what does it mean? So let's say you announce, I found a lost item. And I say, oh, I lost a cloak. but I didn't bring simanim for it. That would make sense in reading the Mishnah. I said the aveda, but I didn't give any simanim. So I said what the object was. That's what it means, aveda. I said what the object was. So if you say aveda tamachriz, then that's perfect. Hakamash malam, what it's telling you in the Mishnah is, even though afagav damar glima, even though you said, I lost a cloak. Kilo amar simaneh lo madrin alei, but because I didn't give simanim, I'm not going to get it back. I need to say what kind of cloak, how long it was, what color it was, all sorts of things about it. Ella, but if you announced, I found a cloak, a lost cloak, and then I said the aveda, but I didn't say the simanim, what could that possibly mean? Amar iu glima, v'amar iu glima. If it means I said I lost a cloak, like you said I found a cloak, and I come and I say I lost a cloak, and then I say, but I don't have any simanim. Okay, so if you say cloak and I said cloak, well, I didn't say anything basically. Of course, I don't get it back. The Mishnah doesn't need to tell you that. So therefore, it must be that Rabbi Yehuda is right, that we just say avedata. Otherwise, the Mishnah makes no sense. Amar of Safar says not necessarily. Lo olam glima machriz. You could say it's glima. Amar iu glima, v'amar iu simanim. In other words, what does it mean? You said glima, and I gave a siman to the glima. So what does it mean? I said the aveda means I gave simanim, but then it says v'lo amaret simaneh, but I didn't say simanim. So what does that mean? Umay lo amaret simaneha, lo amar simanim uphakim dida. I didn't give good enough simanim. Basically, you said, I found a cloak. I come and say, I lost a red cloak. But that's all I can say about it. That's not enough because there's a lot of red cloaks in the market. So that's not going to help us. Okay, that's another way to read it. And then it doesn't necessarily prove anything. Now we get to the line in the Mishna where it said, we're worried about people, these swindlers that basically, even though any person now says a siman, that's not enough. Okay, we have to check if they're ramai or not. So how do we do this? So now we're going to see, again, one of these historical mishnayot, but this time really without any dates. Tana Rabbanit. Barishona, originally, very simple. You give a siman, you get it, no problem. But then there was a lot of swindlers out there that were taking advantage of this. They said you have to bring witnesses that you're an honest person. And now we're going to see a story about it, which is kind of a funny story. But before we get to the story, I just want to point out, this is a very common thing that happens. And, you could go back to the Tikkun Olam Sugyot that we saw. There's all sorts of times when the rabbis realize that the halacha is being used to take advantage. People are taking advantage of the halacha. And then they say, okay, something has to change. And therefore, the Institute, we're not going to make it so easy to get back lost items because of all the things going on. So they change things. So now we have a story. The father of Rav Papa, Irkas Lechamra, he lost a donkey. Somebody found the donkey. So he comes before Rav Huna, says, that donkey, they found, it's mine. So after he gave simanim for the donkey, Rabbi Bar Chana says to him, even though it was Rav Papa's father, go bring witnesses that you're not a cheater. He brings witnesses forward to Rabbi Bar Huna. Amar lahu, so Rabbi Bar Huna says to the witnesses, Yadatem beit Ramaihu, do you know if he's a Ramai? Amrulei in. They said yes. So the father of Papa looks at them and says, Amar lahu, ana Ramai ana? What? Did you just say I'm a Ramai? Amrulei. They said, oh, whoops. Ana lav Ramai kamrina. We thought you said, is he not a Ramai? And we said yes. We thought you were saying, right, the opposite of what you said. We weren't listening carefully enough. So let's see what Rabbi Rav Huna thought about this. Amar Rabbi Rav Huna mistabra l'maiti inish chovata l'nafshe. We assume these witnesses are telling the truth because why would Rav Papa bring witnesses forward who are going to testify the fact that he was a cheater? Now, people don't bring witnesses to support them that are actually going to go against them. Now, this doesn't mean that you would never do this, but because there was a possibility that they really did misunderstand, and I got to imagine, because it was Rav Papa's father, he connected this with the fact that they were honest people. When you go through those security lines, and then they don't look too much at you because they know you're pretty, they also judge the scene by sensing what really is true or not. So basically, this is, right, it was funny. I had Gemaras in my car yesterday and I went into a mall and they made me, open my back door. So my daughter was laughing. I was going to see the Gemaras in there and think, oh, I guess she's okay. So basically, he understood the situation, that this really was a legitimate mistake. Okay. I think also they're bringing this story to show they didn't differentiate. Like even people like Rav Papa's father had to go through this process of proving he was a Ramai. Now, it's true there was a little something going on here, but seems to be a legit mistake. Okay, last Mishnah for today and the Gemara on that. We're now going to talk about a new issue, which is when you find an animal, so you have to feed that animal. Okay, when I went to the Far East and we went on an elephant thing, we found out that it cost $5,000 to feed an elephant per month. So imagine you find an elephant and you have to deal with this and feed it $5,000 a month. That's really quite challenging. So, and what are you going to do? So basically what you're going to do is you're going to feed the animal, keep a tab of how much money you spend. And when the person comes back, you're going to say, hey, you owe me all this money. That's a bit of a problem because at some point you're going to spend more money than the animal's actually worth. So it depends what kind of animal. The Mishnah differentiates between animals that you can work and make money off of. You can rent them out to people. You can use the animal to make money, and the money will more than pay for its food and the expenses. That's what it means. It can work and then eat based on what it makes. So so keep going. In other words, work the animal, make the money off of it, and use that to feed the animal. Now, if you have animals that don't don't make enough money to compensate for the loss of for the amount you're going to have to spend on it, then you sell them. You have to return it to him. In other words, what are you going to return to them if you don't have anything left? If you're going to deduct all the amounts of money you spent, you're going to end up not returning anything. So basically, sell it right now, and the value of that money put aside and to return. So what do you do with this money? And this we'll deal with more tomorrow. Rabbi Tarfon you can actually use the money. It's just you have to, if something happens to that money, you'll have to replace it. You're responsible for, let's say that money gets lost, well, you have to replace it because you're allowed to use it. That means you're then responsible. Rabbi Akiva, those things go hand in hand. Rabbi Akiva says you can't use the money, because you can't use the money, well, if you put it aside and it gets lost, it's not your responsibility. You do what you were supposed to do. You don't have to pay the money out of pocket. Now the Gemara asks, Le'olam, wait, if the animal is like a shore, an ox, it makes a lot of money because you use it for plowing and all that, and covers its expenses, well, forever you have to keep this animal? Like how long? I mean, let's say you can't find its owner, you have to keep going. What if it's a pain? You don't want to do this. Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel ad yud bet chodesh. You have 12 months. In Tanya Namihacha, here's a braitot to support that, that answer that Shmuel gave. Kol davar she'oseh v'ochel kigon para v'chamor, like a cow and a donkey. Mitapel b'hem ad yud bet chodesh. 12 months. Mikam ba'elach. Sham demeim u'munichan. After that, you evaluate. Some people have some. I'm going to put that aside right now, but you evaluate it for its value, and then you sell it. Agalim. Now, this braitot continues, and from here we're going to get into a different contradiction. That will be where we'll finish our daf. Agalim v'seyachim, calves and foals. Mitapel b'hem shlosha chodeshim, only 3 months because they can't work so much. They're too young. Mikam ba'elach sham demeim u'munichan. So 3 months, and then you can sell it. Avazim v'targolim, geese and roosters, mitapel b'hem shloshim yom. Those even are more useless, only 30 days. Mikam ba'elach sham demeim u'munichan. After that, you evaluate and you sell them. Right? You leave them for a little bit because in the hopes you can find the owner, but after that, you sell them. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, tarnegolet kebehema gasa. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, a hen, because it lays eggs, it actually makes money for you. So that's like the big animals that we said you keep for 12 months. And in fact, here's a braitot to support that. Tanya Namihachi, but you're going to see that the continuation of this braitot contradicts the previous one. Here you put the tarnegolet with the big animals. So there you see 12 months. After that, you can sell them. Here it says 30 days, not 3 months for the calves and the foals. After that, you sell and leave the money. It's more work to deal with them than you can make off of them. 3 days instead of 30 days. So we have 3 months, 30 days for the foals and the calves. We have 3 days and 30 days, contradictory sources from the other one. So, right, mikam ba'elach, sham demeim u'minichan. So, kasha agalim v'sayachim, avazim v'tarnegolim. So, both those things contradict each other in both braitot. To which the answer, agalim v'sayachim lo kasha, hadiraya, hadipituma. Depends what you're doing with them. If you leave them to graze, you don't have so much effort and you don't have to spend so much money on them. But lipitume, if you're fattening them up, that's a different story. If they're animals that were meant to be fattened, then you have to deal with them and you have to spend money on them. Avazim, and then we're going to basically give you a chance to sell them earlier, okay, because it's too much work. Avazim v'tarnagolim, avazim v'tarnagolim. Okay, so avazim v'tarnagolim, we're going to say nami lo kasha, habarav rave, habazutre, big or small. And here we get our typical, it could go both directions. Some people explain it one way, some people explain it the other way. The big ones need less work. The little ones need a lot of attention. Or you could say the reverse. The big ones need more food, and therefore you have to, it's not worth it for you. The little ones need very little food. So that's a possible way. Okay, last line for today. Right? You basically sell because it's not worth it. Tanu Rabbanan, here's a braitot that darshans from the pasuk again that we saw before. Hashevotolo, return it to him. What are you going to return to them? Right? What does that mean? They have to have something, you have to have something to return to them. This comes to teach you. Don't feed the animal to itself, meaning basically don't give the amount of money that the animal is worth as food to the animal, because then the person who lost the item is going to end up with nothing. Okay, let's try to do a quick review. We covered a lot of topics today. We finished up simanim d'oraita and talked about all sorts of cases where two different people bring two different types of simanim, and who do we, or edim versus simanim, what's stronger? Then we talked about how long do you need to announce, and then we had a contradiction between how long it takes people to get home to how long it takes people to get home in the Mishna and Taanit. There was a different number to which, right, we tried to answer mikdash rishon, mikdash sheni. Rava in the end just says it's just that we don't want to bother people too much. And then we tried to infer from there possibly whether lima machriz or aveda machriz, and then Rava also said you can't necessarily prove it from here. Then that topic we dealt with later also as well. We said, what do you announce? Regal rishon, regal sheni, regal shlishi, you don't announce anything because you don't want people to get confused. Then we talked about historically what people would do after the temple was destroyed. Where did they announce? And then once the Persians ruled, where did they announce? Because they were taking the avedot to the king, so then they did it much quieter. Then we got to the fact that we are worried about people, the swindlers, and therefore we have to start quizzing them and they have to bring witnesses to vouch for, not just bring simanim, but also vouch for their reliability. And then we said perhaps we can infer from here whether aveda machriz or glima machriz from the wording in the Mishnah, but we said no, not necessarily. And then we got to, we just talked again about the ramaim, and then we got to this last Mishnah about if an animal costs too much money to upkeep, then you can actually sell it. Okay, and that was all a matter of a mathematical equation. How much money could you make off of it versus how much does it need to spend on feeding it? And then we distinguished between different animals, and then we had some contradictory sources about how much time you actually have to leave them before you can sell them, and we resolved those difficulties. Plus added the tarnagolet to the category of the big animals, which actually make enough money, and therefore you have to keep them. But even there was a limitation. Only a year. After a year, you could sell them if you want. That's it for today. Wishing everyone a good day, and b'sorot tovot.